Though Christians and conservatives have been losing on the marriage issue for a very long time, it's never too late to reevaluate, learn from mistakes, change the way we talk about the issue, and start winning again. It's really not that hard of an issue to win on when you have the right message and approach. A long time ago, when this was still a hotly debated cultural and political issue, many Christians appealed to God, the Bible, and religion, generally, for their cultural and political views on marriage. While it is certainly true that God instituted and ordained marriage as between one man and one woman for life, such appeals were ineffective and unpersuasive and unmoving. Why? Partly because of the growth of atheism and agnosticism, which made such appeals fall on deaf ears, partly because Protestantism's theological relativism and egoism allowed individuals to reject all tradition and authority in interpreting Scripture's passages on marriage in an orthodox way, leading to a de facto moral relativism. Partly also because Christians had already made a hypocritical mockery of marriage with their sins, their own adultery, divorce, contraception, abortion, and IVF. And all three of these parts fed on each other. Or those politicians who cared very little about God or religion, or wished to avoid giving religious reasons, I remember many of them supporting traditional natural marriage between one man and one woman, using the cliche that marriage was the building block of society and civilization. While completely true, it was also ineffective, unpersuasive, and unmoving, and still is. Too vague and melodramatic sounding to too many people. Cultural and political effectiveness depends upon having and communicating a very clear idea of who are the victims and who are the villains. Only in this way can you take the moral high ground in the public conversation. When the culture and the law don't recognize marriage as between one man and one woman, children are the victims. And the villains are those who harm children, whether intentionally or unintentionally, by changing the definition of marriage and weakening it both in the culture and in the law. Children have a positive right to their mom and their dad, and their mom's and dad's relationship. This is not a purely religious issue or a purely social or civilizational issue. It's a moral issue, a matter of natural rights. While not every marriage can or does bear fruit in the procreation of children, every child has one mother and one father, and the well-being of that child depends significantly upon the relationship between his or her mother and father, which marriage, as a civil and social institution, is designed to strengthen and stabilize. If you think technology has changed anything about the rights of children, you are deluding yourself. The only thing technology has done is make it easier to violate the rights that children have upon their parents. Children have a right not to be manufactured in a lab and to not be deliberately separated from one or both of their parents through IVF and egg or sperm donation. Children are people, not widgets or products to be made in a lab or factory. They deserve to come into the world because of the love of a man and woman for each other. And anyone who sells or gives away their eggs or sperm is abandoning and scarring their resulting children for life, depriving them of a relationship with them, of knowledge of their own identity and origins. It's cruel. The essential public purpose of marriage is to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to each other for the sake of their children and their children's rights. Marriage, as a civil institution, is about children. The law should recognize it as a children-centered institution. Children and their rights are the reason why marriage is a public civil institution and not merely a religious institution, and why it should have special legal status. The law should recognize the basic facts of biology, social science, and human nature, and should protect the child's rights by protecting marriage. Legal protection of marriage is necessary because children are unable to defend and protect their own rights. And the violation of those rights and consequent harm and damage done is extremely difficult to remedy satisfactorily after the fact. Because marriage serves the very essential public purpose of procreating children and securing their positive rights, it deserves special legal status that transcends mere contract law. Marriage is more than a contract because it intends to create and care for an entirely new human being, an entirely new third party to the quote contract, who has special positive rights that depend upon the marriage relationship itself to be secured. Relationships that have no bearing on children's rights do not deserve special civil recognition and privileges. All other relationships can be and are mere contracts. Marriage should not be about self-centered adults who want recognition and approval and privileges from society and the state for their private relationships, which serve no public purpose. As a civil institution, marriage is not about the happiness or rights of adults, but the happiness and rights of children. If individuals want to formalize their private relationship and create reciprocal rights and responsibilities among themselves, they are free to do that under the law using contracts. But of course, no private individual or corporation outside of that contractual relationship should be forced by government to recognize that contractual relationship or to perform some specific action because of the existence of that private contractual relationship. Sound social science has also proven it over and over again that children suffer when their parents selfishly abandon them in various ways, or don't get married, or get divorced, or allow various things to weaken and undermine their marriages. But do we really need studies to tell us all this? This used to be common sense. The greatest gift a parent can give to their child is to love the child's other parent before, during, and after the child is born. When we denigrate the importance of marriage, a lot of other unintended negative consequences naturally result. Children get turned into commodities to be manufactured and possessed by unrelated adults, separating children from at least one true parent as a matter of routine procedure. And just like any good or property, the state becomes empowered to routinely and arbitrarily assign parentage and custody of children without any regard for biology or genetics. It has happened and will continue to happen unless we fix our culture and then our laws to recognize the natural and pivotal role of marriage for the happiness, well-being, and rights of children. Did you know that Thomas Aquinas makes pretty much the same argument as I'm making when explaining why fornication and adultery are sinful and even mortal sins? If you read what Aquinas says, it quickly becomes clear how much he appeals to human nature, to the nature of childhood, motherhood, and fatherhood, rather than appealing to God's law or scripture or divine revelation. Over and over again, he emphasizes how the harm of extramarital sexual activity is how it injures and opposes the good of the child who naturally comes into being outside the bond of marriage. Just to be very clear, as with appeals to religion or the stability of society and civilization, I think mere appeals to natural law are also unfortunately ineffective, unpersuasive, and unmoving. While talk of human nature and natural law can play a part in helping explain how and why children have positive rights upon their parents and their parents' relationship, the primary message and appeal should be to children's rights, to their own mother and father in a stable, loving relationship, not appeals to abstract philosophical concepts that mean very little to most people. Before we start to wrap up, let's quickly, directly, and explicitly address some very common and popular objections that have already been implicitly answered in this presentation. Notice that all these common objections center on adults and their supposed rights, rather than on children and their actual natural rights. Also notice that all these objections attempt to paint adults as the victims of traditional natural marriage laws, rather than children being the victims of unnatural and innovative marriage laws. These objections reflect just how far our culture and country have fallen from common sense. Let's start with the first objection. People have or should have the right to love and marry whomever, whatever they want or choose. First, let's focus on the marriage issue and put aside the issue of love and which sexual acts are truly loving and which are not, which is a whole other discussion. Now, the first thing I'd ask is, what do you mean by the right to marry? There are no laws preventing people from legally binding themselves to each other or to property with contracts, making vows to each other, living together, having sexual relations with each other, sharing property, expressing affection for each other, etc., etc. Nor am I advocating laws to prohibit such things. This is an emotional straw man. No, what this objection is really saying is, I have a right to force others to recognize, approve, and privilege my relationship. And when properly framed this way, the weakness and falsehood behind this objection becomes clear. What possible reason could there be to force others to recognize, approve, and privilege a private relationship that has no bearing on the procreation of children and the securing of their rights? There is no good reason. Moving on to the second objection. It's hateful discrimination to prohibit two men or two women, or any other combination of human beings, animals, or objects, from getting married or having children. Strictly speaking, discrimination, as in making distinctions and judgments of people, is a natural and necessary part of life. The only question is whether such discrimination is just or unjust. The women's bathroom discriminates against men. Is that hateful or unjust? Or is that a reasonable protection of the bodies, privacy, and safety of women? To state what should be obvious, men and women are not interchangeable when it comes to the procreation and healthy upbringing of a child. So again, if marriage is about children and their rights, it is not hateful or unjust to discriminate in favor of children and their rights, to discriminate against relationships that cannot procreate and provide children their mother and father in a stable relationship. And no one is specifically prohibiting anyone from having children. Nature is the one prohibiting the begetting of children where there is not one man and one woman. And we've already made the point that technology doesn't change anything, that we should not violate the dignity and rights of children by manufacturing them in a lab, and often deliberately separating them from at least one true parent. And when it comes to adoption, we need to recognize the value of both fatherhood and motherhood, and that only men can be fathers, and that only women can be mothers, and that children need and have a right to both a mother and a father. I'll also add that I have no problem with stigmatizing or even potentially criminalizing unjust forms of discrimination that have nothing to do with children and children's rights. People should be allowed to freely make contracts or designate a single person with privileges to visit them in the hospital or make decisions on their behalf, whether that person is a spouse or not. But none of that has anything to do with the essential public purpose of marriage. Moving on to objection number 3. Marriage equality is a civil rights issue comparable to the struggle of Black Americans for equal rights. Traditional marriage laws are like old miscegenation laws. Now, this is merely an attempt to hijack the cultural and emotional capital of the civil rights movement. Skin color is arbitrary, irrelevant, and impotent. Sex is significant, relevant, and potent because it has fertility and procreative powers. Sex has natural implications for love, children, and family. Skin color does not. Race and sex are on two entirely different levels of significance and moral relevance. The true purpose of civil marriage drives and determines the significance and relevance of each category, race and sex. Because the essential public purpose of marriage is for the sake of children, sex is naturally relevant because children naturally come from the union of the two different sexes. Skin color has no relevance when it comes to love, children, and family. Thus, this comparison to race and civil rights that the other side appeals to ad nauseum is simply invalid. Lastly, we have the objection: what about older or infertile couples? Should they not be allowed to marry? First off, while it is extremely unlikely and extraordinary for an elderly couple to conceive a child, it is not completely unheard of or impossible, and the potential for sexual union is still possible. Next, infertility is merely a dysfunction. It doesn't change the nature of the persons or the relationship as ordered toward children. Moreover, infertility is often temporary and treatable, something that can often be overcome. And I don't mean by IVF, but by natural means, by naprotechnology. If you or anyone you know is struggling with infertility, I'd encourage you to check out naprotechnology.com and look for doctors who specialize in it. Regardless, we don't base our norms and laws on dysfunctional exceptions. While not every marriage leads to children, every child has a mother and father and deserves to have their mother and father in a stable, loving marriage. If you think I came up with this framework for talking about the marriage issue and all these talking points myself, you would be wrong. I learned these core arguments and talking points from the extremely underrated and underappreciated Dr. Jennifer Roback Morse, who founded the Ruth Institute, and who I think has the very best messaging on marriage and sexuality issues. Check out her books, website, and YouTube channel for more. I'd like to end this video by pointing out that it is no coincidence that the decline of religion and the decline of marriage have gone hand in hand. According to Catholic theology, the family is an icon or symbol of the Trinity, of the very inner life of God Himself. It is also no coincidence that Scripture, both Old and New Testaments, repeatedly compares this relationship of God to His people to a marriage. Wrong and harmful ideas about marriage lead to wrong and harmful ideas about religion, and vice versa. And these wrong ideas have real harmful consequences for all involved, but especially children. So what do you think of this video presentation? Let me know down in the comments. Even if you disagree, if you got some value out of this, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks, and God bless.